Okay, in today's lesson we're going to be talking about one of the most important elements in music known as rhythm. And rhythm is something that applies to every instrument, whether you're playing the drums, clapping your hands, dancing, playing guitar, playing piano, it doesn't matter. We all have a sense of rhythm. And rhythm is basically the systematic arrangement of sounds in music. Or we could think of it as a repeating pattern that we play that all the musicians follow along or work against each other. So for example, if I were to clap this, that would be one rhythm. If I were to clap this, that would be a different rhythm, right? So we have music, some music can be faster, some music can be slower, that's known as tempo, but we're going to start off with the very basics of what rhythm is and how to think of it from the most simple perspective. So when I teach rhythm to my students, I start off with a very simple approach, thinking of rhythm in a circle. So what I usually do is I draw a circle here, and I call this the rhythm pizza or the rhythm circle. So basically what we do is we start off with the whole circle around. We're going to draw just a circle like just down here. We're going to call this a whole note. So all we need to know right now is the whole note represents the whole circle, the whole rhythm that we're doing here. Now we're going to cut this in half. And lo and behold, we have half notes. We have two halves. So for the half note, what we're going to do is actually draw the hollow circle with a stem coming up from the right side. If we draw it pointing down, the stem will come down on the left side. So it's like a P or a D kind of. Okay, and this equals a half note. Now if we cut the circle into 4 pieces, we have quarters. We call this quarter notes. Okay, so a quarter note is like the circle filled in with the stem going up, or circle filled in, stem going down. We call this quarter note. Now before we move on, it's very important to understand that a quarter note is our favorite way and most common way to count rhythms in music. So we usually call this one beat. So if you think of 1, 2, 3, 4, we have 4 quarter notes and we count 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. So if we're in the time of 4/4, which is also known as common time because it's the most common time, we're going to count to 4 over and over again. So we have 4 fourths, or 4 quarters, equals a whole. Basically, you just count to 4. If a quarter note is one beat, then that means 2 quarters equals a half note. So a half note is going to be 2 beats. And then a whole note is going to be 4 beats, because the quarter note is one beat. So that's kind of what we base all of our other rhythms off of that. It's kind of the middle point. Okay, and if we keep dividing up our circle, we end up with eighth notes, right? So we cut these in half here. Now we have 8 slices of pizza, or 8 beats in the whole circle here. So an eighth note is a dark circle with a flag on it, like that. If you have 2 eighth notes together, they're going to be connected by 1 bar at the top like that. Can you see that? If they're by themselves, they have 1 flag. If they're connected together, they have 1 bar connecting at the top. If you were to write multiple quarter notes, they would not be connected. They'd be individual quarter notes. But for the eighth notes, we connect them together. So this is an eighth note. Now, if we were to get crazy and try to divide this all up again into another halves, you would have 16th notes. So 16th notes are just like eighth notes, but they have 2 flags on them, or 2 bars connecting them across the notes. So a 16th note has 2 flags coming off of it, or if you connect them together, usually you'll see them in a group of 4, and there will be 2 bars connecting the notes together. Eighth notes have 1 bar, 16th notes have 2 bars. Now the same thing applies to 32nd notes and also 64th notes, which are less common, but you do see them. 32nd notes just have 3 bars connecting, or 3 flags on the note. 64th notes have 4 bars connecting, or 4 flags on the notes. Okay, but the most common notes we're going to see are whole notes up to 16th notes. Okay, and like we talked about, a quarter note equals 1 beat. So a half note equals 2 beats, and a whole note equals 4 beats. However, if we want to get 3 beats, we need to add a dot to the note. So we call that a dotted half note. So basically, if we take a half note and add a dot to the right side of it like that, that equals 3 beats. Now, the reason for that is when you add a dot to a note, you add half the value of that note onto it. Now, if that's confusing, you can kind of think about it like 3 quarters. So say we have $1 and 4 quarters equal $1. Well, that's like 4 quarter notes, right? If we have 50-cent coins, those are like half notes. So this is like 75 cents. Here we have 50 cents, a half note, plus a quarter. So those 3 beats are really 3 quarter notes, or 3 quarters of $1. You can think of it like that. So basically, when we put a dot on the note, we add half the value of the note. So if this note by itself without the dot is worth 2 beats, half of that would be 1. So 2 plus 1 equals 3 beats. And it still can be confusing in the beginning to understand dotted notes and rhythm, but that's the most basic way to think about it. Now going from the other direction, if we took a whole note up here and we added a dot to the whole note, how many beats would that equal? Well, the whole note by itself equals 4 beats. And then if we add the dot, we're going to add 2 more because that's half the value of the 4 beats. So 4 plus 2 is going to equal 6 beats. Okay, and if we take a quarter note, we're going to add a dot to that. Well, that's going to equal 1.5 beats because 1 beat is a quarter note, and half of that would be half of a beat. So 1.5 beats. Now that doesn't really make much sense. So what we're going to do is we have to break this into understanding that a quarter note by itself equals 2 eighth notes. If we have 2 eighth notes, it equals a quarter note. So really what this equals is 3 eighth notes. We have 2 eighth notes, it equals a quarter note, plus a third eighth note. So it's going to equal 3 eighth notes, just to break it down in that way, or 1.5 beats, But basically you start to divide it into smaller beats, So if you had a dotted eighth note, it would equal 3 16th notes. If you had a dotted 16th notes, it would equal 3 32nd notes. It's all the same kind of division going down. Basically just understanding that the dot adds half the value of the note to it, right? So that's how dots work. But in the beginning, we're going to play really simple rhythms. We're not going to be worrying about dotted 16th notes and stuff like that. We're just going to be thinking about, if you add a dot to a whole note, a dotted half note's very common, or a dotted quarter note, okay, as well. So you might see something like this. We have a dotted eighth note and then a 16th note at the end. This kind of rhythm, if you do this repeating, it sounds like bump, 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 bump. So in this rhythm, you basically have a dotted eighth note going to a 16th note, okay? It's a little more complicated of a rhythm though, so I want to start off with really simple stuff, okay? I just want you to know about that this is kind of how you would see a dotted note as an example. Now, one other very important part about rhythm is understanding that you can do groups of 3 in your rhythm. We call those triplets, okay? So any note can be tripleted, meaning we can do tripleted eighth notes, tripleted quarter notes, whatever we want, really. Tripleted 16ths. Okay, so say we have 3 eighth notes, and then we put a bracket over it that says 3 is a triplet. So that means we're going to play those notes as 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So if we're in the timing of 4, 4, that means this is going to equal 1 beat. So we'd have 4 of these. So 1 and a 2 and a 3 and a 4 and that would be 4 of these. So this actually equals 1 beat. And they're all connected, that's why they're in a bracket. So that actually equals 1 quarter note. So 1 beat, so this would be 1. So you'd have 4 of these, 1, 2, 3, 4, and those are what we call triplets. Now one other thing, just so you know, we're going to talk about time signatures later, but basically, if I were to change the time signature to 6/8, we don't need this. Because 6/8 would just be 2 of these. So you'd have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 eighth notes is what that means. So now we're going to talk a little bit more about time signatures. So to start off with the most simple way to think about time signatures, we're going to go back to 4/4. That is common time. It's the most common time. You might even see a C written in there in the musical staff. But that's our most common time signature is 4/4. So we love counting to 4 in music, especially Western music. So we're going to think of that as just 4 quarter notes. 4/4 is 4 fourths or 4 quarters, like a dollar, right? So we have 4 quarters, then we would do it again and have 4 more quarters, if you get the idea. So we have 4 in each measure like that. So if we want to apply whole notes or half notes to this, we could think, well, this also equals a whole note, and the whole note goes for all 4 beats, right? Or if we put a half note in there, well, the half note covers 2 beats, so you'd need another one. Okay, and if we apply 4 quarter notes to a measure of 4/4, we could also think of a whole note fitting in that same amount of time, being 4 beats. Or you have a half note, you'd have to have 2 half notes to equal a whole measure of 4 quarter notes. So you might see a song that has a mix of these kind of notes in the beginning when you start off playing more simple stuff. You might have a whole note on one measure, you might have a half note and then 2 quarter notes, you might have 2 quarter notes then a half note, that kind of thing. Or a dotted half note and 1 quarter note kind of stuff. But really we just want to be real simple in the beginning and just really understand the basics really well before we get into more complex rhythm from that. And then one last thought is just understanding that if this is 4 quarter notes, we could also apply 8 eighth notes to this as well. So it would be smaller notes, you'd have eighth notes up here that are connected. So if you think of it like this, you would have 8 eighth notes. And that's why they're connected at the top like that with a single line, because each of those equals one beat. So in music, we want to understand what each beat equals and make it look clear. And the same thing would go for doing 16th notes. We would just have 4 of those and have 2 lines connecting them for each quarter note. So again, it all revolves around one beat, what a quarter note is. And everything from there is just dividing beats into smaller numbers, but everything kind of works around the quarter note being one beat. So in music, before we want to add any more complexity to what we're doing, we want to have a really good understanding of the basics. And in this case, with rhythm and note values.